Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with etrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Hellwig Rear Anti-Sway Bar here on our 2017 Fleetwood Bounder Class A motorhome. So our neighbor came to us today with a lot of handling issues, and that's pretty typical when it comes to these large Class A motorhomes because they're a giant brick that's going to just take all of that abuse from the crosswinds and just if it's a windy day in general. And on top of that, these are kind of not really distributed well when it comes to the weight because typically one side will have a giant slide out in it, the other side won't really have a giant one, and when it comes to the interior, usually all your appliances are on one side and maybe you got a little bit of furniture on the other. So not really distributing that weight real well, so all that mixed together with high speeds, you start kind of swaying side to side and it gets really uncomfortable and honestly a little bit dangerous. So adding in a Hellwig Anti-Sway Bar can help beef up that frame rail, and it's going to help because it's essentially a spring where when it starts to kind of pull one way, so say your frame rail starts to kind of pull up on it, that spring's going to want to pull you right back down. And honestly, when I was installing it, it was a little bit of a challenge trying to get it up to the end link with both sides because the spring's starting to activate. And that's exactly what we want. So at one point I did have to use a jack to kind of push it up just enough so I could pop that bolt through. So overall, pretty easy to install. The bigger thing here is you're probably going to have to take off the wheels, which is the hardest part of this because taking these off requires you to re-torque them back down, and it's a very high torque value with a torque wrench that you're most likely not going to have unless you are a mechanic yourself. Once you get past that, you will have to also swap out your end links, or not your end links, sorry, your U-bolts, and in this case, I opted to just cut them off because we are replacing them. There's going to be some new ones in the kit. That is probably going to be your easiest option, so I definitely grab yourself an angle grinder before you get to this because getting the nuts off of those U-bolts is typically pretty hard to do, especially once they start getting rusty and corroded. The other part of this is we are going to need to create some separation because the crossbeam that's right behind our rear axle here, it's going to be kind of blocked. The 4 bolts that go into that are blocked by the leaf springs. So you're going to need to lift up from the frame at the back, and that'll create that gap to where you can get the bolts out, pop in your bracket, pop the bolts back in, and then you can lower it back down. So this might be something where you just don't have the equipment to handle it, and if that is the case, definitely feel free to reach out and use our dealer locator, and you can enter in your zip code and find a shop near you and get it professionally installed. If you are the mechanic or you're that person that has all that equipment and you want to do this yourself, definitely feel free to stick around and I'll help walk you through the process. All right, now to start off our install, I've removed the wheels so that way we have better access to look at what's going on in here, and because I'm doing another install. So at this point, this is the perfect time with that previous install to start my sway bar because when you have all the weight on the suspension, it's going to compress in, and that's going to block us from getting to these bolts right here, which is exactly what we need to pop out. So there's going to be 3 bolts in there. We're going to get these 2 bottom ones and then the back one. Front one we're going to ignore because the bracket that we have is got an angle where it's going to just cut right past that. So if you have the wheels on and you have it sitting on the ground, fortunately it's going to be blocked by this leaf spring stack, and it's going to make it super hard to get in there. And you can get in there with a wrench and get it loose, but at that point, when you start to back the bolt out, the bolt's so long that it's going to end up hitting the leaf springs again. So what we've done is we've jacked up the motorhome from the frame at the back. That way it could kind of take that weight off of it, and we've let our suspension hang. That's given us that access that we need. I'm going in with a 22mm socket. I feel like each one of these is always different, so you're definitely going to have to check yourself, make sure you're using the correct one, because usually I don't feel like I'm using metric sockets when I'm doing these, but in this case, that's what fit. All right, so these have retainer clips on the back. Clearly this one is not hitting something. There we go, now it's coming out. There we go. Let me grab that real quick and I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So on the inside of our frame, you got one of these guys, and this little tab here should hit that cross member that's running across our frame and stop that, so it kind of acts as a weld nut. We're going to pop these 3 out like I said real quick, just the same way. If you notice it's getting stuck though, go down there and look, because on the opposite side when I did this before, the tab had been completely bent over, so it wasn't catching, and then it was just sitting there spinning the whole time. That one came right out, no problem. All right, I'm going to get on the other side, see what's going on. Like I said, probably am going to have to stick a socket on the nut side of this. and hold it in place while I take off the bolt. All right, so here's the bracket I was talking about. You see how it's got a cutout for that front top hole. We are going to just slot those bolts that we just took out right back in and get them with those nuts with the little retainer clip on them. And then we will torque those down to spec as well. All right, I'm gonna crawl back under there, and then I'm gonna start these just by hand, just spin the bolt essentially, get a couple threads in there, and we'll come back with our impact, snug them down, and then torque them. Kind of switching back and forth. The last thing we did was get that first bracket on both sides on our frame rail by popping out those bolts into that cross member. Now our next step is going to be getting the tie plate on at the bottom of our U-bolt stack here, or leaf spring stack is what I should say. Now there's this giant tie plate right here, and you can see one side is going to have a weld for support, and that's going to be down on the bottom here. We want that facing that way, and we want this more triangle-shaped portion of it kind of facing inwards and towards the back of the vehicle, because it's going to pop in through those U-bolts, which I've got our new one here, that sit just like that, and then we'll have another bracket that's going to mount to this plate that will then house the bracket that actually holds on our sway bar. So to get to that point, you got to take the nuts off of the bottom of those U-bolts. I have attempted that, and it didn't go so well. A lot of time these kind of rust on, and then they don't want to come off, and it's a huge fight. In our case today, since we have new ones going in, the easiest solution and the simplest, honestly, here is going to be just straight up cutting those bolts. From there, I'll probably do it a little bit higher up, right around this area, and I'm going to try to go between the leaf springs, but I also try not to cut all the way through, leave like just a tiny little bit, and then I'll usually take a pry bar and just hammer that in between it, and usually it'll just kind of snap off. Because I don't want to end up nicking the leaf springs and causing any kind of damage on them. And if you go in between them, you get a little bit more of a gap, whereas this kind of rounds out and is a little bit further out, closer to the U-bolts at the center of it. So realistically, I'm just trying to not hit anything else. If you got any other wires, hoses, anything else in the way, now is the time to move those out of the way, zip tie them out of the way, whatever you got to do to get yourself in here. Same thing with the wheels again. I took those off because there's no way of getting an angle grinder in here safely and really doing what we need to do. So it's just a lot simpler just to take the wheels off. And like I said, I already had them off because I was working on this air spring here. Now, I had to switch back to our sway bar just because we need our air spring to clamp down to our leaf spring pack, and we can't really do that when our old U-bolt's in the way, and we need that new one in there before we do all that. So it's kind of pointless to get that all set up on the bottom without getting that first part done. I also supported our suspension here at the hub. I've got a jack stand under it, so that way once we cut those U-bolts, we don't just lose our axle, because that is the only thing holding our axle up right now is those U-bolts holding us up to the leaf springs. So super, super important that you are properly supporting the weight here. Make sure that you get the right rated jack, and make sure you got it in a good spot where there's not a chance of anything kind of slipping or moving on you. Make sure that you're taking all safety precautions, safety glasses, any kind of specialty glove that you might have that'll help protect your hands, stuff like that. All right, so like I was talking about, I had the other one pop on me. I actually got it perfect. I didn't end up touching anything on the leaf spring pack. This one I stopped just short of it. I got maybe a 16th, maybe a little bit up towards an 1/8. I'm just taking my pry bar, and if I need to, I can cut a little bit more into this, but this is probably the safer way, because if you do have it, if you're cutting it, that's under a lot of tension. That's going to pop like mine did. So I'd rather not have it pop and hit anything or hit me. It's a lot easier to just sit here and kind of spread it with the pry bar. All right, at this point, I'm going to get on the back here a little bit and try to wiggle this around. So my initial issue was that none of the nuts on the bottom really wanted to come off. I'm going to try with my impact again. I might be able to loosen up this backside and then be able to just pop the whole U-bolt over enough to get it off of this lip and then just drop it right down. Other side, since it did pop, it's already popped over, and I probably could get it the rest of the way once this one is loose. So I'm going to get under there with my impact. We'll try that out. If not, I just have to come back and I'll cut it on this side as well. All right, so I have the old U-bolts out. I'm switching in the new ones. Now, one thing before I get them in there, I've noticed the very tip of each one of these U-bolts, the threads are a little messed up. Not every single one is that way. Sometimes the nuts will just thread right on. Sometimes you gotta kind of recut the thread by putting the nut back on. So just check each one. Make your life a little bit easier, because once we get under there, we're not only holding on to this heavy tie plate, but we also got this heavy tie plate that we're trying to hold up as well, all while trying to also get a washer and nut on this. So if the threads want to fight you, it just makes it a whole lot worse of a job. And then also, you can almost start cross-threading these if you don't make sure that it's going in correctly. Like this one on this side almost started to do it when I first put it on, and it's kind of giving me a little bit of resistance as I go. So that tells me it's kind of trying to cut those threads back to how they should be. I drop the U-bolts in from the top first. So I like to go at a diagonal angle. Dropping those in makes it a lot easier, especially if you did have the tires in place. And then just make sure you are watching out for any lines. Don't want to end up hitting anything. Now I'm going to get the tie plates under there. I'm going to get under there myself, and we'll get the nuts on. Good. Right, getting all my stuff lined up. Now we can come with that tie plate. A little bit of a struggle getting both on. If you had like a little small floor jack, that might be a good option for you, or a little bottle jack. All right, then we got these washers. These are going to be a lot wider than the other options in the kit. We'll pop those on. Take one of our nuts. And like I said, make sure they're going on straight. You don't want to be cross-threading these and then ruining the thread and having to take it all back out. And I'm going to get this up pretty high so it'll hopefully help hold the factory tie plate. Okay, now I've got my lubricant, I've got my polyurethane bushing, and I got my other one over here. I've also grabbed extra set of gloves and some towels, because once you get this on your hands, it's going to be a bad time. It's pretty sticky. It doesn't want to come off because it's designed to live under the vehicle and be able to lubricate this, even though water, salt, snow, all kinds of grime is going to get all over this. So definitely a good idea to wear some gloves. I'm going to squeeze out about half of it onto this first bushing, and then I'm just going to smear it around. And the other half we'll put into the other one. And then after that, I'm going to get it onto our sway bar, and then I'll swap out my gloves. There we go. And this has a pretty straight cut through it, so it's real easy to just kind of pull it open. And then if you look at your sway bar, there's going to be a flat spot on both sides, and that is right where it's going to live, because it's going to mount up on this plate, and that's almost in line with our eyelet here, which is also in line with our end link. So placement, pretty easy with this one. You don't have to try and guess. But I'm going to get this one all on, and then I'm going to grab a second set of hands to help me lift the bar up. It's a little bit tricky trying to hold the bar, plus trying to get all the hardware into your brackets and get it secured. But once you get one side, you can kind of hold it up and you can swap over. So starting off, we're going to pop in our bolt here, and that is going to run through our end link, then through the bracket, and then back through our end link. We'll finish that off with a flat washer and then a nylock nut. And then I'm going to snug this down, but I'm not going to go too tight. I want some wiggle room here so it can kind of sway back and forth, and we can line everything up properly while we get our sway bar in place. All right, I've got my strong, handsome man, Brad, here, and he's going to help me lift this up. Now, I've already started this out just to kind of show Brad what we're doing, but let's show you guys as well. I've got my smaller bolts here. We're going to throw a flat washer on there. That's going to drop down through our bracket, this tie plate that we added on at our leaf spring pack, and then we'll come up with the bar along with our D-shaped bracket. That'll pop on through that, and then we'll finish that off with another flat washer. And then we've got some mechanical lock nuts that we're going to be putting on there. And then we can get everything torqued once we have it swung up, and then we get that other bolt through the other eyelet. All right, both of those are started. We're at a point now where they're going to start biting in since it's a mechanical nut and it's going to require a wrench. But once you get that tightened up, we're going to start shifting this around and get it centered and get these eyelets set in place too. I'm actually just going to pop it in right now since you've got yours on there. So bolt through first, then your flat washer, and then your nylock nut. And I'm going to come back, I'm going to snug these down real quick, and we'll get to these as well. All right, now I'm switching over to the torque wrench. All right, now we're at the point where we're going to be torquing everything down. I know I've already torqued the D-mount or D-shaped brackets, but we still have our end-link bolts, so there's 2 of those on each side, and then we also still need to fully torque down our U-bolts. So these are all listed on like the 2nd or 3rd page of the instructions, but it doesn't go and tell you exactly which bolt is what. So I'm going to go through it real quick. The bolts I got going through here are 5/8, those larger ones for the end links, and then 3/8 down here on the smaller guys. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at that torque table that they have listed in there, so that way you're properly torquing everything. Now at this point I do have my U-bolts torqued down. I just need to do one more pass just to make sure that each one is fully torqued. When you are torquing, you need to go in a kind of a crisscross pattern, so pick one of your starting bolts, and then from there you're going to go cross, diagonally, then cut across, and then cut back across diagonally. So that way you're kind of getting a star pattern, so you're evenly getting that up there. So you should be going up to certain torque specs and stages. That way this is nice and evenly providing that pressure on there. In my case, we have the 3/4 inch not lug nuts, I keep saying that, U-bolts. I have the 3/4 inch U-bolts, so I need to make sure that I am choosing the correct torque value on that paper because there's going to be different ones. So just double check, make sure that you know what size you got, and then do the correct torque pattern and correct torque spec. And one thing I've been doing is just kind of using the rear def to kind of press against. So I've been putting my foot up or like against the shock mount, and that's kind of been helping me. With ours, I am able to do this with a 1/2 inch drive torque wrench, but you may find if you have those 7/8 bolts that you have to get a much heavier duty torque wrench. This one I've been just using the front sway bar, the factory one, to help me out. All right, each one of these is good. We can now drop our vehicle back down, and I do still need to re-torque my lug nuts as well on the wheels. That's probably why I keep saying it over and over. But at this point, that is going to do it for the installation of our sway bar. Now's the point where we want to get our vehicle out on the road, test drive it a little bit, and then we want to come back and re-torque, make sure that all of our hardware is torqued back to spec, and then from there, you're going to want to do it occasionally. Maybe do it before you go on a big trip, every couple of months. Just kind of recheck that because hardware can loosen over time. It's especially on these factory sway bars. A lot of time when these come in for a replacement, I see that the bracket's completely loose. The bushings are kind of starting to wear away because there's been too much play and movement in it. So this is something that you should be checking pretty regularly just to make sure that it is functioning properly. Well, that is going to do it for our look at and installation of the Hellwig Rear Anti-Sway Bar here on our 2017 Fleetwood Bounder Class A motorhome. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right anti-sway bar for your motorhome, or you just need help with the install, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out in your journey.